before we move to the vote, I think Ben was the last person. If we just want to get Ben to finish off the discussion and then we can move to the vote. Ben, you can go ahead.
Thank you. So I guess what I just feel the approach we should take is basically this, I had an item, the transparency plan and the schedule brought forward, but that wasn't a decision item because it was brought up last minute. So I would just say that this was also brought up last minute, and before moving to a decision, I think we should just table this to next meeting, just to so we can review everything. And based on that, I just want to ask. Well, first I'll just say, if there's a club that, if there's clubs going for funding, in the next month, then would it not be for like the fall semester anyways? So it could be pushed back a little bit until we have the discussion. If there is any requests at all, I just want to ask for clarification there.
Yasmin, if you'd like to go ahead, you can.
Yeah, thank you. I honestly, because we can't really push it to next meeting because we are thinking, first of all, we're hiring our clubs coordinators and we're planning to start funding requests in July. So it's really difficult for us to move this for the next meeting. I'm sorry if it's a bit short notice, but we haven't even begun with that motion that you put forward to board in the first place. So us removing it or us reversing it wouldn't make a difference. And also we have the policy 500 coming soon. And so we just want to get this out of the way so we don't have to go through all of this again. But yeah.
Ben, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so I just feel that, we need to do our due diligence, and I believe that, for that reason, we should have more time to just review everything. But just to speak to like why this change was made in the first place last year, it was to just add that accountability piece. And if the board doesn't fully support that, that exact policy, I would be okay to changing the threshold based on, how clubs are currently working and everything. But I do believe we would not be doing our due diligence if we just completely remove that policy change. So, for example, the threshold could be, raised to 3,000, which is double what 1,500 is, and there's it gives more clubs that efficiency of getting approval by CPC, being under 3,000, and I feel that would be appropriate at this point, but I just think completely reversing it wouldn't be doing our due diligence. And yeah, so perhaps I can propose that, and maybe we can discuss thoughts on a different threshold. Thank you.
Faison, if you'd like to go ahead.
I was just wondering, do we have kind of like an average of what the funding kind of is, the average funding is for like the year, like with each club, with each event?
Do you mean like the average that gets approved?
Yeah, I mean, so how we like approve most club events, right, that are like kind of small here and there. I'm not talking about like maybe 30K. I'm talking about maybe the average that we have. Maybe we can work around the average.
Yeah. So we don't really have a consistent average just because we had the 2 years of COVID. And then last year it was like a kind of mix between them. Last year we were able to approve around 80,000, I believe, I maybe a bit more. But we don't really have an average. However, we do every year we get the clubs levy comes in and we put aside, I believe, 40% of it. Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, for club funding. And so based off of that, we aim to spend that money for clubs. The remainder of it goes to like other expenses and it goes into the reserve as well. However, we make sure to, because we're a non-for-profit and because this is student money, we make sure to spend that money on the clubs. However, we do make sure that every meeting we update the budget and make sure that we're on the right track and we're not overspending at all. If that helps at all. Sorry.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
So I understand Ben's concern about doing our due diligence, but I also think that the people that have been members of the CPC, at least more recently, have clearly expressed that they think that the due diligence has been done. So I think that this is probably just a motion that, you know, not all of them are going to be unanimous, but I think this is one where we should just vote on it and vote how you believe, and then that's it. I don't think this needs to be tabled, at least. Seems like a few people also don't believe it needs to be tabled as well.
Maybe if we could take a vote, right? Because you don't want to force anything in. So maybe you can just take a vote for tabling it or not.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that too. Is that something we can do? Robert, Kaylee, we can vote on tabling or not?
Someone can call the question and we can vote on the original motion, or someone can motion to amend the motion, or someone can motion to table the motion.
Alex, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'd just like to exercise that first option. If we could just move the motion.
To call to question? Yep, so
Yeah.
we just have to have a vote to call to question. So you just need a mover, seconder, vote, and that would be voting on if you wanted to stop the discussion right now and go right to Yasmin's motion. And then we will do a second vote on her actual motion if that one passes.
All right, so I'm assuming Alex, you're
Well,
good with moving
Mr.
that?
Chair, could I just point of information? I'm not sure if I did. I thought I mentioned making a motion to table it. Now I would rescind that motion, and I don't believe we need to table it, but I do not think we should vote on this right away. So just based on that, I just want to suggest to members, call to question should be only used in certain points in time. There are some other items I would like, well, not a point about this specific item, I would just like to clarify, because calling to question on something that came up last minute and we're making a decision on, that isn't doing our due diligence. That's based on what Robert mentioned last time, and I'm wanting to, you know, not only hear from more board members, but also just clarify some things that have happened in the discussion, because you know, once again, this just came up last minute, and want to make sure we're all on the same page. Thank you. So for that reason, I'll rescind my motion to table. I believe we can just proceed to speaking about the motion to vote on today, but not go right to a vote at this point in time. Thank you.
I'm confused there, because doesn't that just mean you want to table it? Ben?
I'm sorry, maybe I froze. I didn't hear what you said, James.
Well, you're saying that you want to rescind your motion to table, but that you don't think we should vote on it. So basically you do want to table it, right?
No, I don't want to vote on it. I don't think we should be voting on it right now. I think we should continue the discussion for a bit longer. I believe this is the last item on our agenda, other than the roundtables. So I believe we can take a bit more time. That's what I'm mentioning here. Thank you.
So you want to continue the discussion. I mean, if anybody else has anything else to say.
Jim, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Austin.
I would like to second Alex's motion to call the question and would like to move on.
All right. So if you're voting for here, it's to end the discussion. If you're voting against it, is to continue the discussion. All those against? And I'm assuming that's just the same hand from Ben. So that's
Was
Ben, is that against or for, or like from before?
Actually, just point of order, our discussion, clearly we aren't on the same page. I was trying to get across an amendment. So that would be a motion to amend. So we wouldn't be able to call the question if that is taken. I definitely think that was overlooked on the, so if we could please have a discussion on the amendment I spoke about. Thank you.
Can you clarify what you want to amend? Because I think, was it that you want to continue the discussion or that you just don't want to vote on this motion right now?
No, so my amendment proposed was about having the threshold changed to 3,000 rather than eliminating the policy that was enacted last year. So it would be to like amend the actual motion to raise that threshold to 3,000. Thank you.
So I think it'd probably be best if we vote on the motion that's presented to us. And if it fails, which would mean keeping the threshold, we could then further vote on if we wanted to bring up the threshold. So I think we should just leave it for now and vote on the motion that we already have.
Point of information. So I don't see yeah, so the amendment, okay, so I just think there's a miscommunication here. So the motion brought forward was to have all club funding and be approved by the club's policy committee. But actually that motion is not a proper motion because the club's policy, because it's not directly speaking about the policy that's trying to be changed. The motion actually would have to read that the policy in the board of directors policy, so this isn't even policy 500, the club's policy that was amended last year, it was 102. So the motion would have to read about amending and striking out that line in policy 102 where club funding over 1,500 must be approved by the board. So we should first correct that original motion. And then to that extent, maybe if Kaylee, you could do that, and then everybody can visualize this, and then I'll comment on what my amendments would be. Thank you.
Thanks for the clarification, Ben. Kaylee, can we do that to word it better where it makes more sense?
I don't have an updated policy 102. So the motions that Ben are talking about was motions that were circulated through an email that he sent to the board. So I don't have like a minutes document. I don't have a lot of the information that I would usually have when doing policy amendments. So those amendments, I don't have like an updated 102 other than the one that the board just voted on like what, 3 or 4 motions ago. If the board would like to make the amendment that Yasmin is proposing and approves that, they could task Robert, who would also would just come to me to make any necessary policy adjustments so that that can happen.
Yeah, I was just about to say, and then Austin put in the chat, we could just change it to the board approves all funding requests to be delegated to the CPC, because that kind of solves the problem, right? But we could also task with fixing all the outstanding policies that would need to be fixed.
So just point of information, Robert did put in the chat what the amendment was to the policy. So I know that Kaylee does have the amendment in her email somewhere, but even if it's not available at this point in time, Robert did put in the chat what the amendment was. So we do have that available, and I'll just repost it for you guys so that you can see. I believe it would be proper procedure to have that policy there for reference, because that's what we're deciding on. So if everyone can see that in the chat.
So I think because this is just getting into procedure, but I think the discussion, everybody knows kind of what's going on. So I think if it's friendly with Yasmin, because this was her motion, we can add on to here that be it resolved board like removes the previous decision to have funding requests greater than 1,500 go to the board. Be it further resolved, board approves club funding to be approved by club policy committee. Is that friendly with you, Yasmin?
Yes, I don't think you can see my thumbs up, but yes.
And I'm going to take this out because are we calling to question now? Like
Yeah, let's redo that. So
If Alex doesn't, I will move the call to question.
okay. Okay, we can do the vote.
so Austin's mover. Do we have a seconder? Carly. Thank you. And per usual, all those against. There we go.
Whoops, sorry. I just need to step out for 1 second just to help get my kids to bed. I'll be back in like 3 minutes.
Okay, so we can move on to Austin's item here about the March 28th, 2022 board meeting. Austin, take it
I'm
away.
going to tell you right now, James, that we should probably just do the first two votes and tell Kaylee how we did it, because my thing is going to take a second longer, and then we're going to have to go back.
What you talking about?
Because we called the question, so technically we
Yeah, I went too fast there again. My bad. Okay. Yeah, so that vote was to call the question. Now we're gonna actually call the question. Be it resolved, board removes the previous motion to have board approve club funding requests over $1,500. And be it further resolved that the board approves all funding to be approved by the club's policy committee. All those against.
Oh, hold up, James, we need a mover and a seconder.
That is right. I keep going way too fast. All right, so we got Yasmin and Alex as a mover and a seconder. Kaylee can write that down when she's back.
I'm taking minutes, so I'm good.
Okay, perfect. All those against. Ben, is your hand to vote against, or is it to comment on your comment in the chat? Because we voted to call the question, so that means we're ending the discussion.
Yes, I know I'm voting against. The only other option is to put something in the chat. That's why I put in the chat, but I know I can't speak at this point.
Okay. So then everyone else is in favor.
recorded, so I've got it recorded.
Okay. Austin, if you would like to go ahead with your item, you're free to do so.
Yeah, sounds good. So basically, I'm going to build off of what Robert's thing was earlier, his election item that he brought up. From my understanding, Robert's going to be bringing forward more information for the board to understand the implications of all the motions that were passed in the last meeting that I was the mover on and brought up. There is one, so I'm looking at some of the previous meetings. One of them was the March 28th meeting, 2022. The motions that we are going to be discussing that I am wanting to single out to make sure, because I'm not sure if they were included in the last motion from the meeting beforehand. So if not, just to make sure that it's explicitly rescinded as well, are these motions in the chat. These four motions. The first one is to have the VPSS and the VPEA report to the Senior Manager, Student Engagement, and report to the Director of Governance and Advocacy, effective 2023 to 2024. That one needs to be rescinded. If it's going to be a student-led organization, we can't have the student executives report to full-time staff. The next one is removal of the VPFA as of 2023-2024. I'm sure the full-time staff could tell you previous VPFAs have had the ability to sit back and do nothing. And right now, the role is, in all honesty, not exactly full. It doesn't have very many responsibilities. And I'll be transparent with that. Like looking at some of previous VPFAs, they could legitimately show up to the office 2 hours a week and their role would be done. So the idea of removing it is probably stemming from that idea of it not having that many responsibilities and just kind of getting, like, what's the point of a role? It's a lot of money for not that many responsibilities. The reason why I want to rescind this, because right now, because it currently doesn't have responsibilities, doesn't mean it can't have responsibilities. I think we should instead look at restructuring the executive schools, including Laurentian University, which is a much smaller population than us, have 4 executives. Western University has an executive team of, I believe, 6. Ontario Tech is a 4-person exec team, and go on. Making our exec team 3 is just not going to be sustainable long-term, especially as we're growing. We should be looking to see what the future is and how we can structure our organization for that properly. The next part is just a further resolve that the VPFA's responsibilities for the ancillary fee review will be redelegated to advocacy. If we're not getting rid of VPFA, we shouldn't be redelegating their authority. So we're going to rescind this one as well because it should stay with the VPFA, since I would like to not discontinue that role. The last one is it resolved that the executive title changes of VP Student Services becomes Student Programmer, and the VP External Affairs becomes Student Advocate. Would like to rescind this one because, well, this is just dumb. Anyway, going back to the first one, like I said before, we can't have the executives report to full-time staff if this is a student-led organization. If you look at some other organizations, Carleton University Student Association, for example, their general manager reports to the president. There's a lot of different structures for student unions. We are one. We have a little 2 system where you have staff on one side with Robert as the head, and then you have execs on the other side with Fasten as the head, and then the execs underneath Fasten, and then you have all the directors and managers underneath Robert. And at the top is the board. every organization at the top of the board. Carleton, for example, it goes board, general manager who has, or not general manager, board, then president. President has the exec on one side, and the exec all have the student coordinators and like student staff. Then you got full-time staff underneath the general manager, and they go over there with all the full-time staff, and they have a couple student staff too, but it's split underneath both. Right now, we're moving towards a direction of board, general manager, and full-time staff, with executives being sprinkled in underneath the full-time staff. And that's something I'm trying to avoid, because you can't have a student-led organization if the students are following people who are not students, like full-time staff members. So that's why my motion is to rescind all 4 of these motions. So I be resolved that paste those motions be rescinded. If anyone has questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Any questions, comments, or concerns for Austin? Robert, you can go ahead.
My one comment, Austin, is that I'd be happy to have the discussion, because typically what has happened, at least in my 4 years, I've only been involved with the student union for 4 years, is typically what does happen is you have your executives and you have your staff, and there's a discussion. And at which point in time, what comes to the board is the conclusion of the discussion. And quite frankly, if both sides don't agree, the board breaks that tie. In some cases, what happens is what comes to the board. In fact, every motion that's come to the board in my 4 years has been a conclusion of a discussion. And at not any point in time in my 4 years has there been a debate, has there been a situation by which that hasn't been resolved amicably. What does also typically happen is that a motion comes to the board. It is circulated in advance. The board has the opportunity to review the motion in advance. There's an opportunity for people to, prepare for a particular meeting, and then there's an opportunity also for a vote, and then it's called to question. So, that has been how we have operated for 4 years. I've only been involved with the organization for 4 years. I can't speak to anything before that. I will also agree that, for example, there are all different structures that are out there. I will agree with that. I will also agree that, for example, right now the VPFA portfolio, for example, is light. I will agree that there's probably some opportunity to basically recast that in some way, shape, or form. I don't disagree with that at all. I will say that, when we get into last year's sort of board situation, they're in a situation, they're forced to make some decisions, they make some decisions, they move forward. Were they considered? There's many board meetings that were considered as a part of that. Were students considered? Yes, they were. Is this a student union? Yes, there's 12. Possibly in a future motion, there could be 13 board members, all students. I will also state that as the general manager of the organization, while I'm a member of the board and relatively valuable as the position, not myself personally, the board, because I have implications for insurance, I have implications for liquor license, things of that nature. I don't vote. I would never advocate to vote. So, my position on this, quite frankly, is that, we have a further discussion about this. We bring this forward to a motion, whether it's in July or August. If we disagree or there isn't some sort of amicable position, then at the end of the day, the board will break the tie. And that's kind of where my position is on this. I think if we're looking at this just purely from a staffing perspective, the staff really only has a couple kind of, I'm going to call it core things. And again, we're only speaking this from a staff perspective. We would like the organization to move forward to serve students. We would like the organization to follow its values of things like accountability and things like doing good. That's what the really goals and objectives are. The bar is real low. We'd like people to show up for work. We'd like them to put in an honest day. We'd like them to have goals and objectives. We'd like them to move forward to the goals and objectives. Like ascribed to that those goals and objectives are checked on by the board. I don't think there's anything nefarious here. I do think that the discussion and calling to question today is very much premature. But those are my comments for today.
Austin, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I fully agree, Robert, that normally motions should have like a discussion between either myself or you or full-time staff or whoever. But these are motions that have already happened, and these are ones that I'm trying to take back. And that's because if you look at the motions themselves, the external, there's multiple of them that have to deal with my role and the student services role. And these motions happened while both the SS last year and the EA, which is myself, were on leave for the elections and that whole ordeal, which means that we actually were not consulted. So this is actually coming back to say, hey, these are things that we wouldn't have agreed with. And these are things that shouldn't have happened. And looking at the actual votes, every vote in this meeting was either 4 people or 5 people. There was not one vote in this meeting that had more than 5 students vote. And right now we have 10 voting members in this call. So it's another opportunity for 10 students to actually have a say of where they want their student union to go. So that's another reason why I'm bringing this back up. And it's just because that period was a very small number of people actually making massive decisions that affect everyone. So that's another reason why I'm bringing that up. And if we would like to have discussions on how we can move forward, like past this, I'm fully open. And I just think that right now we need to vote to cancel this, because as of right now, these votes are standing. And if we don't vote today, we are going to have to vote later, because right now, as it stands, there will be no BPSA next year. There will be no vice president position next year. The current roles that have the vice president, whatever, will be reporting to staff. And those are all things that shouldn't be happening. So I'm going to say again, motion to rescind those 4 motions from the March 28th meeting. And obviously I am the mover, and if anyone has questions, feel free.
Robert, if you'd like to go again.
Yeah, so I guess my piece is that, you know, in terms of the elections, any elections that would occur in February. So we're in June right now. So in terms of timing, I will recognize, like, fully, Austin, like I'm being totally honest with you, is that I'm a staff member. I'm 51 years old. I have, if I look at across my board here, if I start to look at who's on this call, I have relationships with none of these people, and I never will. So I recognize that we look at, you know, sort of the power of the board and, you know, who's on the board and things of that nature. It's always going to be very, very student centric, and is going to be dominated by students. So my ability to influence, like, I am never going to be calling up James Maxwell Borillis as the chair and going, yo, dude, like, I want to move something. I'm never going to do that. It's just not something I'm going to move forward with ever. But what I would say is that, you know, at the end of the day, what I would like to very much have, as I have for 4 years, a discussion. I understand there was a discussion last year. It's a different executive. I recognize that moving forward. I would really much like to have the discussion with the executive team moving forward. And at the end of the day, if we agree, fine. If we disagree, fine. If we come up with other creative solutions, great. Again, going back to the goal and objective, the goal and objective is not necessarily the motions you see. The goal and objective essentially is, you know, how do we create an organization that actually delivers, you know, high performance? Like, how can we perform better? Because I will say in 4 years, the performance on an average level has been less than standard. So that's what I would say. Are there other ways of addressing the performance? Probably there are. Have we figured out what that looks like? No. Have we had that discussion? No. I recognize today, if you called a question, I'm going to lose. I mean, everyone on this call, I can recognize who's on the call, and I recognize who knows who. I have some value in the organization, but I don't have the relationships, and I recognize that. I think it's a bit premature. I quite frankly, I think that, you know, the discussion could be moved 30 days. It's not going to really have much of an effect on anything. It has the opportunity to basically engage. We figure out what goes on from there, and then we move forward. If you're hell bent, quite frankly, on moving forward to a call question, I know you're going to win tonight. I know that. So you can do that. It's completely up to you. But at the end of the day, I really think that it's often better to understand each other's mutual positions, then come up with creative problem solving, and then move forward. That's been the approach I've taken in most of my life. So that's what I have to say. And I don't think I'll say much further.
As this is Austin's item, if you'd like to answer, you can go ahead and then we'll move to Ben.
Yeah, totally, Robert. And I appreciate having some of these creative discussions moving forward when I see you in person.
We can move on to Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I guess I would just want to say that I very much understand Austin's point of how there was, you know, 5 student members voting on these motions last year, and now there's more members on the board. The only thing is that, as we've seen in pretty much all of the items that have happened in the board so far this year, there's many board members who are not even speaking at all. So I would just want to take this point to recommend that for the board members who you know, may have agree with something that has been raised, that you know, you take the opportunity just to clarify that, you know, when it comes to voting, you know, a certain way, that, you know, this is why you agree with this person, and just explain why you're going to vote this certain way. Because I've only heard a couple of people, mostly from the executives. I do, you know, want to especially thank Aisha for contributing so far, but I just don't think it's as strong of an argument of the numbers, because going back to the board decisions last year, there was 5 student members, but we had multiple meetings to discuss the motions. We all discussed thoroughly. We took a lot of time with it. And on that point, it led to, you know, ensured we had a strong rationale, whereas it's there's no evidence of that at this point, because only a couple of individuals are explaining their rationale for voting. So I just want to take this time to encourage board members to speak up and explain why they'll vote a certain way. Thank you.
Carly, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know that anything I'm going to say hasn't necessarily already been said by Austin, but I guess just to say how I would be voting and kind of my rationale. As I see it, if we do, whether we wait and have further conversation before voting on this or vote today, voting to rescind these 4 motions, we still have the opportunity to come up with creative solutions and put forward more motions that may kind of speak to the effect that these were hoping to. But I mean, yeah, some of them, like 2 of them, it's just, oh, if you voted for one, it wouldn't make sense to keep the other. But I do think the kind of step towards, or I guess step away from being so student-led isn't necessarily a positive one. And I think the structure we have it as it is set up, though it certainly probably has issues, to me definitely seems better than having these changes. So that's why I would be voting in favor of rescinding these.
Ben, is your hand still up from before? Would you like to speak again?
I mean, it's just here because I don't see anybody. Thank you, Carly, for sharing that. And I would just perhaps through you, Chair, if you could call on other members to share their thoughts as well, just so we, like, can continue with a thorough discussion. Thank you.
Well, I mean, you had already asked and only Carly came forward, but I guess I can go ahead with my opinion on these. I strongly agree with Austin, and it's a student union. It's fairly simple. It should be led by students. And even the ones that are just like changing the names of the titles, like like Austin said, they're just not even like good names for them. That's really my only rationale, is it's a student union, and this seems to be leading away from students. Alex, you had your hand up. If you'd like to also comment, you're free to do so.
Yeah, thanks, James. I was actually going to say just exactly what you said, that we are, at our core, a student union, or an organization, and our members are our student body. So I think it is a little hypocritical to be to have our organization not run by students. And of course, the full-time staff, I can't speak too much because I don't work in the office, but I'm sure the executives very much appreciate all the support that they get from the full-time staff and all the guidance that they would get from the full-time staff. But at the end of the day, this is a student union for the students. And I think that's the only rationale you really need. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand. So thank you.
Yeah, I really think that's a good point. Alex brought up that like the full-time staff's work is very, very, very much appreciated, but like we said, the Brock University Student Union. So Yasmin, you can go ahead if you'd like, and then Hannah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just like to voice what a lot of the directors have mentioned. So I've been in this position for about 2 months now, and I can say that full-time staff have been great. They have led us into the year really well, and they've been doing a great job overall. However, looking at these motions that were passed, I was surprised, and we're like, yeah, this is a good idea. Maybe, I guess, because of the problems that happened last year. But honestly, I don't understand why the VPSS, for example, would report to the senior director or senior manager of student engagement. Me and the senior director of student engagement work together, and that's how it should be. I don't think I should report to a full-time staff member, because that way I don't really have authority over a lot of things. And thinking about it now, if I were to have to report to the student engagement manager, a lot of things that I wanted to do for the student as a student representative would have not happened, because they have that authority over me. And so I believe that for the people that are coming in after me, it wouldn't make sense to have it go that way. And this is just me speaking from 2 months experience in this role. That's just some of the stuff that I wanted to mention. In general, I think that a lot of what the other directors have mentioned about how we are a student union, and us passing these motions basically makes our positions, it makes us kind of useless in a way. I work full time. I work 9 to 5, and I am not a student anymore. I'm a graduate. I graduated, and so I take this job very seriously. And I do realize that there are a lot of mistakes that have been made years prior, and there's a lot of things in the structure, the organizational structure, that needs to be adjusted. But that's something that me and the other execs have also realized, which is why one of our main priorities for this year is to fix that up and change a lot of things. This is a very extreme solution, and I do not think that this should be our first resort. This is why I also support reversing these motions.
Before moving on to Hannah, I'd also like to mention that Austin did bring up the point about these being passed by a board of 4 to 5 members. with all due respect to Ben, because you were a board member at the time, at least a voting member, the students have absolutely no trust in whoever was on the board from March till the beginning of May. And a lot of these decisions, like I know last meeting we reversed a few things too, and it seems like all we're doing is just taking down all the work that the last board did, but a lot of this stuff is just stuff from a board that had absolutely no trust in the student body. And now we have a newly elected board of a lot more members. And I also think that you can see that a lot of people disagree with this. And I don't want to like take away the validity of former board members because they were also elected, but it's, yeah. Hannah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really have anything new to add, but just for the sake of sharing where I'm at, like I do agree that we are a student union and we should be student led. And yeah, I definitely heard people's opinions and things of what was going on, you know, during the February elections, kind of towards May and everything. And it is nice that we do have some like fresh faces that we can make some changes and kind of like restore the student trust in the board and in the student union. So I do agree that we should reverse these motions.
Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Austin.
Robert did bring up a really good point earlier, though, that I do want to flag for everyone, and it is something that I think that we should consider moving forward, and it's something that we can, the exec and staff could probably talk about before we come back to you all to figure out nitty-gritty. We don't have any real metric on performance for executives on like besides like how we like say like looking back. I've seen executives sit in the office and watch Netflix during their 9 to 5 instead of doing anything. I'm not going to say who anyone is, but I've also seen executives not show up to their office for consistently or at all for up to 6 months at a time. And there are those like things, and I think that's what the idea of this motion was, is, or one of the motions at least, was that we need to have some sort of way of ensuring that executives who, to be honest, right now are kind of unchecked. I could go to the office whenever I want, and as long as no one explicitly complains about it, I will be okay to do whatever I want to do, like at the end of the day. And moving forward, long term, is that something that we want to have consistently? I don't think so. So we should definitely have a way of having some sort of accountability, and that could be performance reviews. And like an idea would be like anonymous commenting from office staff and other executives that board members see, or something along those lines. But this is something that Robert or staff and execs can talk about, and we can come forward to a later board meeting, because it is something that I do agree with needs to be addressed, the accountability of student executives. But I just don't believe that these motions are hitting what we want to achieve properly. So definitely make sure that that happens still. Anyway.
Robert, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo that with Austin. Sometimes what happens is things build over a period of time, and there's perhaps an overcorrection or an oversteer. So what happens is something moves far too far. I'm not going to share with the board tonight, but over my 4 years, I've seen things that you in board capacities don't see. In terms of accountability, or in terms of expenditure of funds, or in terms of other things. And they wouldn't be very flattering to you as board members. And what I would indicate is that there probably needs to be some accountability measures. And I'm fine too. I'm a member of the board too. So I would have no concern. I've had performance reviews. So but I would have no concerns with those at all either. And so what I'm always, I mean, maybe one thing maybe Austin gets that I also get is I come from an athletic director background. And one of those things is that, like, I know Austin, for example, was a fairly high performance baseball player. I know he was a member of our rowing team. And I want to see a team get better. That's kind of what I'm interested in. I want to see a team that shows up for practice every day. I don't want to see a team that goes compete when it's compete time. And I have not consistently seen that in my 4 years. And I have to admit, like, the motions, I had some to do with them, but didn't have all to do with them. And quite frankly, I never vote on them. I can never vote on them. And I would never advocate in a million years to vote on them. I would also say that, echoing, the comments made by, Hannah and others, I recognize fully that this is a student union. I recognize fully that the board is all, is all comprised of students, and that's who votes on this. I wouldn't have it any other way. So I'm not advocating for that at all. What I am advocating for is that we do need to put some metrics in place by which, there's encouragement for students to show up, for students to actually complete projects, to actually focus every day on students. So how do we make the experience? How do we make the condition for our students better every day? And that isn't always the case. I think there's a lot of ways of doing that. I actually feel fairly confident, having spent some time with 2 of our executives over the last few days, that we have the right people to do that. Certainly, I worked with Austin last year. One of the things that I shared with Austin is that, quite frankly, he's been one of the best executives we've had. And I think that there's opportunity. But again, in any sort of situation, there can be a situation by which it oversteers. Perhaps this is the case. But in moving forward, certainly there is a solution, because I don't think, quite frankly, if I ask Fatin or Yasmin or Austin if they actually have any, if what they think the student union should be is that students cannot show up and still get paid, that students can, for example, use funds that they maybe shouldn't use. I don't think they would agree with that. I'm pretty confident in saying that. And I do think that there's some dialogue to have moving forward to make the organization better. So that will be my final comment of the night. So thank you very much, James.
Fatima, you had your hand up. Would you like to go ahead, or should I move to someone else?
Yeah, so I haven't really spoken on this yet, but I decided I should probably put my 2 cents in. I think there's definitely things that need to be changed, because, I mean, obviously, the way things are right now aren't ideal, especially in terms of the VPFA role or, just being held accountable in general. But I do think that what's been decided is a bit of an extreme, especially something like having VPs report to the senior manager. Like, I mean, like, even like looking at this from like comparing it to other student governments in Canada, it doesn't really, like, I can't really find any similarities to that, like to any other student union. I just think that would make it more of like a full-time staff union more than a student union, just to put it bluntly. I mean, I think like it's worth a conversation, but I think like something like that, for example, is like I have a very obvious opinion on, right? Like I don't even like I don't really see how I could be convinced of that, like the VPs should report to the senior manager of student engagement. Other things like maybe like for example, like we should probably completely change the VPFA profile, right? Should we discontinue it? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I think like it's something that we definitely need to, discuss more before just going on with the decisions that the previous board made, especially since we have a lot more board members this year and we're not really in a crisis anymore. I think when we're in a crisis and we make decisions like that, it's really easy to just say yes, 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 like let's do this, let's do that, just to fix things, because everything was just like going to shit basically during the time that these decisions were made. But I think now like everyone's, where everything's a bit more leveled off, like we could think about this like level-headedly and think through what we should do. Like I said before, like things need to change, but like I think there's some things that it's kind of obvious that like that's not the solution. So yeah.
Okay, Aaliyah had her hand up, but she just put something in the chat. Ben, if you'd like to go again, you're free to do so.
Thank you. And yeah, so I guess I'll just comment on what I think in terms of a part of how the decision was made last year. So the motions were brought to the previous board, by the full-time staff. They had worked out the solutions and so like when we looked over the motions, for the first time, we were skeptical at first, just like all of you guys, and what we did is we did have an extensive discussion that did involve one by one going through things and having the opportunity to speak to the board lawyers. And so I would like us all to have that opportunity again, as well, just so that we're on the same page with regard to their input. And that was certainly helpful for us last year. So as I mentioned, we were skeptical about things at first. What I did was obviously ask a lot of questions, and we made sure that we pushed it off to approve at a future meeting after further discussion and so forth. So I just hope for us to have that kind of opportunity to go through everything one by one and have the opportunity to speak with the board lawyer. And I think that would be helpful before voting. But if the board does want to take action now, which people have mentioned, I would suggest a small amendment to having those approvals. Obviously they have to go to referendum before being enacted. So I would say putting the motion could be to put a pause on those changes until we figure out how to improve them, and that will stop it from going to referendum, obviously, which is what I know like we need to have more of a discussion on them before something like that. So that's my suggestion, is amending it to pausing those changes. I'd like to hear the board's thoughts on that. Thank you.
So just Robert's rules wise, because I don't want us to get mixed up like we did kind of in the previous motion. So, oh, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. If Ben's proposing a motion, we need to have a mover, a seconder, and then vote whether to accept his motion to pause, and then we have a discussion on it, or we have a mover, seconder, it's voted down, and then we just revert back to the original motion that Austin has. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I'm assuming, Ben, you're gonna motion your amendment. Do we have a seconder? Fatin, is your hand to speak?
My hand was to speak.
Okay, so do we have a seconder?
If there's no seconder, then the motion fails.
We have Aisha raised her hand. Was that to second, Aisha?
No, sorry, that was a mistake, sorry.
Okay, so no seconder, so we revert back to Austin's motion. We had some people that were wanting to continue the discussion. Fatin, you had your hand up next if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something quick. Obviously this doesn't mean like I still think like like staff can bring in motions, but I just think like decisions that were already made, like I worry that they were made like for different, I mean, like based off of what I know from staff, everyone was very scared during that time, and especially like in terms of reputation and their own safety, and like, you know, just them not being attacked again like they were during that whole situation with elections. So I think like again like I really want to hear full-time staff out. I just think like it needs to be brought forward again like to us, like to this board, and maybe like thought through again, and we can even like work on the new motions with the full-time staff or something. But yeah, like I just don't want this to seem like we're just like completely, you know, disregarding whatever the full-time staff had been working on or what their opinions are. Like I do recognize that, you know, like obviously their opinion matters in this organization, but I just think like that may not be the best way, like just going on with the decisions that were made during that time.
So maybe for that, we could add something at the bottom that says, we be it further resolved that we task somebody to, or at least the executive and full-time staff, to go over this stuff again, such as like, you know, reporting hierarchy. And we had, I guess, the portfolios of each role. We could add something like that maybe at the bottom. Is that what you're trying to get at, Fatin?
No, I just wanted to make that clear in general. Like, nothing really needs to be in writing. Like, I guess I just want to say that.
Okay, never mind then. There were more hands up before we voted on Ben's amendment. Is there anybody else that wants to speak before we move to a vote? All right, so we'll just get a mover, Austin, of course, and we need a seconder, Carly. And for the vote, all those against? And seeing none, it's unanimous, 11-0. Well, that is basically it. Oh, Ben, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Chair. No, I would just like to put my hand up for an abstention on that motion, please. Thank you.
And Carly, is your hand up from being the seconder, or would you like to say something?
I just had a question because I know Faison said in the chat that he had to dip out. So is it still 11 of us?
Yeah, it's 9. Good catch. All right, so moving on to the roundtable. Does anyone have anything to share with the board? Ben, is your hand up for that, or is it from before? Either way, just go ahead if you have something to say.
Sorry, no, it was from before. Thanks.
All right, anybody have, Austin, go ahead.
I'm back from Europe, everyone. So I'll you might see me in St. Catharines starting probably this weekend. But yeah, I'm back. Nice seeing you all.
Anybody else? I would like to say that me and Yasmin and Aaliyah, we went to the Pride event that was put together by HRE. Carly, great job. I know you were a big part of that. Anybody else got anything? All right, our next meeting is July 26th. Yeah, the spring rolls were great. And the cookies. I was literally telling someone earlier that I was craving cookies, went to the event, and there were soft, like M&M cookies. It was great. All right, so motion to adjourn. Do we have a mover? Carly, Austin, everybody wants to motion that. Meeting adjourned.
I was actually just gonna tell you about the cookies, but I'll also motion to adjourn.
Oh yeah, what about the cookies?
So there wasn't actually cookies, but we had gotten some catered for the self-care drop-in the day before,
Oh.
and they had brought way more than we thought, so we had a bunch left.
So
So
I
I
lucked
ran
out.
back to the P2P room and grabbed them. So you're welcome.
I lucked out. Let's go. I was craving like a soft, just like store-bought cookie. Nice. All right. Well,